Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the space where we don't just, scratch the surface. We go deep, we pull out the essential knowledge, and then hand you the frameworks you can use right away. Today, we are on a pretty critical mission, I think. We're going to try and master the psychology of powerful communication.
And this isn't about little rhetorical tricks or, tips for public speaking.
Yeah.
This is about speaking smart. It's about leveraging what we actually know from cognitive science, from psychology, and using those mechanics to make sure your ideas don't just, get heard. They actually take root.
They land and they stick. That's what we're aiming for today. It's all about precision. We want to distill the most actionable insights, the nuggets.
The nuggets, yeah. The specific frameworks and methods that are going to allow you to really fundamentally transform how you get an idea from your head into someone else's.
Right. Moving you from just talking at people to making sure your message lands with total clarity, but also that it sticks around for the long term.
And that's where we have to start. With this really fundamental idea, powerful communication, it doesn't start with you obsessing over what you're saying.
Okay.
It starts with understanding how the listener's brain is wired to process information, how it filters, how it prioritizes. Because if you don't get that part right, even the most brilliant idea will just bounce right off.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's unpack that. The psychological foundations of attention and influence. We have to start with the sort of brutal reality of it. We're all dealing with these huge cognitive limitations.
We are. Human attention is an incredibly scarce resource. And to speak smart, you first have to understand how the brain filters everything that comes at it.
And it filters almost everything.
Almost everything.
Yeah.
Think of it like this. Your brain has this hyper-efficient, really aggressive internal bouncer. Some people call it the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
RAS, okay.
Its only job is to save you energy. And it does that by blocking out something like 99% of all incoming stimuli. It's a security guard. It stands at the door of your conscious mind, and it's scanning for three things, and three things only.
And what are those?
Novelty, personal relevance, and threat.
Okay, so new for me or dangerous?
Exactly. If your message isn't immediately flagged as one of those three things, if it's boring, if it's generic, if it's passive, it doesn't even get in the door. It's dismissed before it even has a chance to reach your conscious thought.
So if I start a presentation and the first thing I do is read the agenda off the slide,
You're done.
I'm done. The brain has already tagged it as low novelty, low relevance, and I've lost them.
You've lost them before you've even started the content. That's the first rule. You have to bypass that filter. Your opening has to immediately promise them something relevant, something personal, or introduce a complete surprise. If you don't hook that attention in the first, say, 15 seconds,
You're in trouble.
you're not just in trouble. You are actively fighting the brain's natural impulse to just tune you out for the rest of the time.
Which I think leads us directly to that piece of advice we always hear, right? People remember stories, not facts. But the why of that is what's really interesting here. The sources dive deep into the neurological reason for the power of narrative.
Yeah, and the preference for stories it's deep. It's almost evolutionary. When you present someone with raw data, let's say a list of quarterly earnings figures, you're primarily activating two little spots in the brain, Wernicke's and Broca's areas. They're the language processing centers, a very localized, very low engagement activity for the brain.
Okay, so it's not very taxing. It's not very memorable.
Not at all. But when you wrap those exact same earnings numbers into a narrative, a story about the team that faced this huge challenge and how they overcame it, something totally different happens. You trigger a whole cascade of neurological activity.
So what's lighting up then? What are we activating beyond just the language centers?
Well, first you're activating the emotional centers,
Eh.
the limbic system. And that starts releasing chemicals like dopamine, which aids memory, and oxytocin, which fosters connection.
Okay.
And you're also activating sensory processing areas. This is called neural coupling. It's fascinating. If your story involves, say, running, the listener's motor cortex lights up as if they were the ones running.
Wow, so they're not just listening, they are experiencing the story.
They are simulating the experience. And that distributed activation across all these different brain regions is precisely why stories have such a high recall rate. They provide context, sequence, emotion. It's a far, far superior format for memory than just a lonely data point.
So it reframes storytelling from this optional nice to have into a mandatory delivery mechanism if you want your message to actually stick.
It's essential.
Okay, let's talk about the speed of this stuff. The science of first impressions. How fast are we talking here? And what are the specific communication elements that feed into that initial perception?
We're talking milliseconds. I mean, it's effectively instantaneous. Studies show that these initial judgments people make about a speaker, they boil down to two core questions.
Right.
Two axes, really. Perceives warmth, are they a friend or a foe? And perceived competence, can they help me or can they hurt me? These judgments are formed instantly, and they are incredibly sticky. Very hard to change once they're set.
And so your opening moments, your first few seconds, are just decisive.
Completely decisive.
Yeah.
And it's not about what you're wearing, not primarily.
I was just about to ask. I might think it's the suit I have on.
Nope. It's primarily your vocal prosody, the music of your voice, and your initial nonverbal cues. A slight, genuine smile establishes warmth. A low, steady pitch and a moderate pace, you combine that with direct eye contact, that projects confidence, certainty.
And the biggest mistake people make.
The disorganized opening. Fumbling for your words, using a ton of filler words right at the start, or having that weak, rising inflection at the end of a statement. It makes you sound like you're asking a question instead of making a declaration.
Right. I'm here today to talk about our sales figures.
Exactly. And if you fail to project that competence and warmth in those critical first few seconds, your audience is going to filter everything else you say through a lens of skepticism. It doesn't matter how good your content is after that.
This is a perfect transition then. We're moving from the outward signals to the subtle internal forces that dictate how the message is actually received. I'm talking about cognitive biases that shape communication. These are the mental shortcuts we all use.
Right. And a smart speaker doesn't fight them. They understand them and navigate them.
Okay, so let's break down three really powerful ones. Let's start with authority bias.
Okay, so authority bias, this is our kind of hardwired tendency to give more weight, more truth to a statement just based on the speaker's perceived status or expertise. It's not about the content's merit, it's about the source.
This is the classic, the doctor in the white coat prescribes a drug. Even if I've read the same research, I'm going to trust the person in the coat. But what if I don't have a white coat? Or a fancy PhD title? How does a normal communicator leverage this bias, ethically, without just name-dropping or sounding arrogant?
It's not about your position, it's about projected authority. And that comes from preparation.
How do you project it?
You do it seamlessly right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So instead of opening with, I think we should do X, which is just your personal opinion,
Right.
You open with, based on the comprehensive data analysis from last week, where we analyzed 15 of our top competitors, the necessary next step is X.
I see. So the authority isn't coming from your title. It's coming from the rigor of your process.
Right.
The depth of your prep work. You're citing the work, not just your feeling about it.
Exactly. You shift the source of authority from your identity to the objective evidence you're representing. And another way is just through your delivery. A firm tone, a clear structure, and getting rid of all that hedging language. No more maybe or sort of or I kind of think. Certainty signals competence, and competence triggers the bias.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move to the next one. The framing effect. Everyone knows the classic example, right? The surgery has a 90% success rate versus a 10% failure rate. But let's make it more practical for like a high-stakes business conversation.
The framing effect is so powerful because it taps directly into loss aversion.
Which is?
It's the psychological fact that we humans feel the pain of a loss about twice as strongly as we feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
So losing $10 hurts twice as much as finding $10 feels good.
Exactly. So a smart communicator will always frame their message to hit the most compelling psychological trigger, not just the most logical one.
Can you give us a more advanced example, something beyond the medical one?
Sure. Let's say you're pitching a big infrastructure upgrade. It's going to require a huge capital investment.
Okay.
You could frame it with a gain frame. Something like, this project will cost $5 million, but it will generate $8 million in new revenue over the next 5 years. It's logical. It's fine.
But not very compelling.
Not as compelling as a loss frame. A smart speaker might use what's called a temporal frame that leverages that fear of loss. They'd say something like, every year we fail to implement this upgrade, we're exposed to an average of $1.5 million in maintenance and downtime costs. Investing the $5 million now is the only way to stop that inevitable recurring drain on our resources.
That's a huge shift. You've reframed the investment not as a cost to get a future gain, but as the only way to avoid a guaranteed ongoing pain.
Yes. You've made spending $5 million feel psychologically safe because it's protecting against a loss that they can already feel. It speaks directly to our primal need to avoid risk and falling behind.
It's incredibly persuasive, and that connects really well to the next idea, which is priming and word influence. This feels even more subtle. The idea that specific word choices can powerfully affect how someone understands what comes next.
It seems subtle, but its effects are profound. Priming works by activating specific concepts or, schemata in the brain. It's like you're tilling the soil before you plant the seed.
Okay, so it's not magic. How does it work in practice?
So imagine you're about to ask your team to make a really high-risk, entrepreneurial kind of decision. The last thing you want to do is start that meeting by reviewing the quarterly risk assessment reports.
Of course not. You'd be priming them for caution.
Exactly. Instead, you start by using language associated with freedom, innovation, discovery, large-scale success. Maybe you'd start by telling a brief story about another company's seemingly impossible project that succeeded against all odds. You're preparing their minds to be receptive to a risk-oriented idea.
You're setting the stage.
You're setting the psychological stage. We can even talk about scarcity priming. If you subtly introduce the idea that opportunities are limited or that a window is closing, even if it's not directly related to your main topic, the listener becomes subconsciously more attentive when you do introduce your primary opportunity.
So you might mention how hard it is to retain top talent before you pitch your new employee incentive program.
Perfect example. You've elevated the perceived urgency of your solution just by the words you use to set it up. The words literally create the environment for the message.
Okay, so we're using priming to build the psychological environment and framing to shape the value proposition. But this brings up a really important question, the ethics of it all. How do we make sure we're using these incredibly powerful tools to strengthen a message, not to manipulate the listener?
That is the critical question.
Yeah.
And the discussion here isn't really about abstract morality. It's about practical, long-term communication. The line between ethical strengthening and manipulation is actually pretty clear.
What is it?
It's alignment with truth and shared goals. If your framing and priming are being used to maximize the clarity and understanding of a proposal that is truthful and genuinely beneficial for both parties, that's just effective communication.
But if you're using it to hide costs,
Or misrepresent risks, or push a benefit that only serves you, that's manipulation. And critically, it's incredibly short-sighted. You might win the argument today, but you'll destroy the trust you need for every conversation tomorrow. The goal is always to maximize the listener's accurate uptake of your message.
right, so we're moving from these sort of subconscious cognitive forces to the much more immediate interpersonal dynamic. Well, let's talk about emotional intelligence in speech. This is the internal work you have to do to stay connected and in control in real time.
And it absolutely begins with that internal work. The skill of reading the listener. And I mean really reading them, focusing intensely on their nonverbal cues and the context of the situation.
We hear about body language, but you're saying we need to go deeper.
Much deeper. You're looking for dissonance. Is the listener verbally saying yes, but you see their shoulders tightening up toward their ears? Are they nodding politely, but they've completely stopped taking notes?
That sounds exhausting, trying to process their words and all those nonverbal cues at the same time.
It requires deep, active listening. But smart speakers treat those nonverbal cues as a constant, real-time feedback loop. If you spot a micro-expression of confusion, a furrowed brow for just a split second, you don't ignore it. You pause and you adjust.
So you might say something like,
You might say, I just threw a lot of information at you. Let me rephrase that one key point to make sure it's clear. You use their nonverbal signal to guide your verbal delivery. You're co-creating the understanding.
and part of that emotional processing is not just reading them, but recognizing and anticipating emotional triggers in them and in the dynamic itself.
This is where preparation and context are everything. If you know you're going into a meeting to discuss a budget cut, you don't need a crystal ball to know that frustration and fear are potential triggers.
Right.
So anticipation means you deal with that proactively. You validate that potential emotion first before you even get to the facts. You don't dive into the spreadsheet. You start with, I recognize that this proposal represents a significant change, and I completely understand why there might be some resistance to it.
So you name the feeling in the room.
You name it and you validate it. By acknowledging the potential feeling, you disarm their emotional brain before it can hijack the conversation. When a person feels seen and understood, they are far, far less likely to become defensive.
But what happens when things get heated anyway? When those emotions do spike? We need to have strategies for self-regulation. for staying calm and persuasive when we're facing resistance.
Self-regulation is the absolute anchor of a smart speaker. When you're challenged, your body's natural response is often that fight or flight mechanism. Your heart rate shoots up, your voice gets tight, and you just want to rush your words or get defensive.
Right.
The strategy to counter this is twofold. It's physiological and it's cognitive. Physiologically, it's about forcing your body into a calm state. You do that with a deliberate, deep, slow breath right before you respond. That physical pause is a moment of pure control.
And what about the cognitive part?
The most powerful cognitive tool is a technique called name it to tame it. As you feel that internal heat rising, you internally label the emotion. Just say to yourself, I am feeling defensiveness, or this is anxiety.
And just naming it helps.
Yeah, it helps immensely. Because by labeling the emotion, you engage your prefrontal cortex, the rational executive part of your brain, and that immediately reduces the intensity of the emotional reaction in the limbic system. Then you can cognitively reframe the situation. Instead of seeing the other person as an attacker, you see them as a partner whose concerns you haven't fully addressed yet.
That reframing idea is huge. And it brings us perfectly into our next section, segment 2. Speaking smart clarity and core delivery skills, we've set the psychological stage now. How do we actually structure the message for maximum clarity?
We have to start with the absolute non-negotiable foundation.
Yes.
Which is that clarity is power. And the very first piece of practical advice is the meticulous, almost obsessive habit of removing filler words.
We all know we should do it. The ums, the uhs, the you-knows. But why is it so powerful? And why is it so hard to stop?
Filler words are basically audible placeholders for uncertainty. When your brain hears, it interprets that as a moment of cognitive dissonance. It thinks the speaker hasn't fully formed this thought yet.
And that just chips away at your perceived authority.
Instantly. And it slows down the listener's ability to process what you're saying. The reason it's so hard to stop is that we have a deep-seated fear of silence. It's called kinophobia. We think a pause signals that we're incompetent or that we've lost our train of thought.
So the immediate fix is to just replace the with silence.
Exactly. And when you do that, the listener's perception does a complete 180. A pause isn't interpreted as uncertainty. It's interpreted as thoughtfulness, deliberation, composure. It's the sound of a confident mind selecting the right word, not just scrambling for the next one.
But you have to accept that the silence is going to feel way longer to you than it does to them.
Way longer. That's the key you have to internalize.
But just being silent isn't enough if the next thought that comes out is still a mess, which forces us to focus on the importance of structuring our thoughts before we speak instead of just, rambling our way to a point.
This is non-negotiable, especially when you're under pressure. A listener can handle a lot of complex information, but they cannot handle rhetorical confusion. You have to have a mental outline. Even for an impromptu question, that first second should be spent just identifying your one key takeaway, your destination.
Before you start the journey of the sentence.
Yes, because rambling isn't just inefficient, it's the enemy of respect. You're wasting the most valuable resource they have, which is their attention.
Okay, so speaking of mental outlines, the sources detail this incredibly simple but really potent tool for achieving that structure instantly. Let's spend some real time on this. The 3-step SMART speech framework. Point, reason, example. The PRE framework.
The PRE framework is it's a gift. It's designed to align perfectly with how the rational brain wants to process information. It wants a thesis, then a justification, then some proof.
It's an intellectual shortcut for the listener.
It is. It does the hard work for them.
So walk us through a scenario. Let's say a speaker have a complex proposal, like they need to convince their team to reduce the scope of a big project. How does PRE make that clear compared to how most people would pitch it?
Okay, so the average rambling pitch, it usually sounds something like this. Well, I was talking to the engineering team, and they were saying we're having some issues with the scope, and the budget is also getting tight, so I was thinking, maybe we should just focus on the core deliverables for now. Like just phase 1, maybe that's better.
It's hesitant, it's confusing, it has no structure.
Zero structure. Now, let's do the exact same pitch using the PRE framework. Let's start with the point, the thesis. We must immediately reduce the scope of Project Phoenix to phase 1 deliverables only.
Clear, decisive, I know exactly what you want.
Then the reason, the justification.
Yeah.
The current scope requires a $1.2 million budget increase in Q4 that we do not have, and staying on this path guarantees we slip into the next fiscal year.
So now I have the critical why.
And finally, the example, the proof, the impact. If we keep the current scope, we will miss our critical holiday delivery deadline. That's exactly what happened with Project Triton in Q2, which cost us $500,000 in penalties. Focusing on phase 1 protects our deadline and it stabilizes the budget.
Wow. I mean, the comparison is, it's night and day. PRE turns this vague, hesitant suggestion into a decisive, logical recommendation. It completely respects my time as a listener.
It forces intellectual discipline on the speaker. And that makes the process of listening totally effortless for the audience. And that discipline leads us right into the next idea, the art of short, impactful sentences.
Right. There's this common misconception, isn't there, that using long, complicated, dense sentences makes you sound intelligent.
It's the opposite. The sources are clear on this. Powerful speakers are human translators. Their job is to make the complex accessible. The intellectual heavy lifting should happen before you open your mouth.
Because long sentences just overload our short-term memory.
Completely. A long sentence with a bunch of dependent clauses forces the listener to hold too many pieces of information in their head at once. And when that memory load gets too high, retention just falls off a cliff. The smart speaker uses concise, active language. One idea per sentence.
So what are some of the specific techniques we see from, say, great TED speakers? How do they keep the energy up using this concise delivery?
They rely heavily on two things, active voice and the rhetorical rule of 3.
Okay, active voice. The team implemented the solution, not the solution was implemented by the team.
Exactly. It's direct, it's punchy, it'd have more energy. And the rule of 3 is about grouping ideas or examples into trios. For some reason, it creates this very satisfying sense of rhythm and completeness in the listener's mind. It feels whole and it's highly memorable. They deliver points in these short rhythmic bursts.
Okay, so we've refined the words and the sentence structure. Now let's talk about the actual delivery mechanism. Voice psychology and nonverbal power. This is where the how you say it can be more important than the what.
This is where your control directly translates into credibility. We have to focus on the core vocal mechanics, tone, pace, and the strategic use of pauses. A speaker with a flat, monotone, fast-paced voice is signaling anxiety or a lack of confidence. It doesn't matter how good their data is.
So how do you consciously use things like vocal variety modulation and pitch to project authority?
Authority is projected through deliberate control of your instrument, of your voice. An authoritative voice is typically a bit lower in pitch. And crucially, it has a downward inflection at the end of a sentence. That signals finality, conviction.
Whereas a rising pitch sounds like a question. It signals uncertainty.
Exactly. And vocal modulation, just varying your volume and pitch, is essential for emphasis. If you deliver everything at the same volume and pitch, then nothing sounds important. You project authority by, say, slowing your pace slightly when you introduce your main point, maybe increasing your volume a bit for the powerful example, and then lowering your pitch for the final conclusion. That controlled variety signals that you are in complete command of the material.
This brings us to the tactical use of silence. The sources call it the golden pause technique. This feels like a high-risk, high-reward move. When do you use it, and how do you avoid it just becoming awkward?
It is a high-reward move. The golden pause is a powerful rhetorical device because it creates a psychological vacuum. The listener's brain automatically leans in and focuses, trying to figure out why the sound stopped. It compels attention.
Okay, so where do you deploy it?
2 key moments. The first is right before a critical statement, to build anticipation. Let's say your point is the most important thing you'll say. You pause for a full 2 seconds right before you say it. The silence primes the listener to pay attention.
And the second moment
is right after critical statement, to give it time to land. If you just dropped a huge, complex new fact or a really shocking statistic, you pause for 3 seconds afterwards. You let the audience actually process the gravity of what you just said.
But a 3-second pause. In a small meeting, doesn't that feel like an eternity? How do you know when you've crossed that line from a thoughtful pause into just uncomfortable dead air?
That's a great question. And the answer is, the golden pause has to be earned by the content.
What do you mean?
If you pause for 4 seconds and then say, I went to the store this morning, it's bizarre, it's awkward. But if you pause for 4 seconds and then say, this is the single decision that will determine our company's survival for the next decade, the gravity of the statement justifies the silence.
So the content provides the context for the pause.
Exactly. A good rule of thumb is if the content is important enough to pause for, the listener will interpret it as authority, not awkwardness. And you can practice with micropauses less than a second, just when you transition thoughts. That gets the audience used to you pausing, so the big one doesn't feel so jarring.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's move into segment 3, advanced influence, persuasion, and conflict management. We've covered clarity and delivery. This is now about connection and compliance.
Right. And we have to circle right back to narrative. Storytelling that captivates is about using that structured narrative to build deep influence.
We mentioned the hero's journey model earlier. Most people think of that with, myths and movies. How on earth can we apply something like the hero's journey model to a boring internal report or a proposal to automate a process?
It's surprisingly adaptable because the hero's journey is really just the core structure of facing a challenge and achieving a transformation. We just compress it into 3 simple acts for a professional setting.
Okay, what are they?
Act 1 is the ordinary world. This is the problem, the status quo. You have to establish the baseline of existence before your solution. Describe the inefficiency, the stress, the pain. For example, every Friday, our accounting team spent 6 hours manually reconciling data. It was a process filled with errors and late nights. You create that relatable tension.
So you establish the pain point, then what?
Act 2, the call to adventure and the ordeal. This is where you introduce your solution, the new process, the new software, as the difficult but necessary path. You have to detail the struggle, the hard work, the resistance, the moments you almost gave up. This builds suspense and makes the victory feel earned. Implementing the new AI automation was our call to adventure. It required 2 months of grueling data migration, and we almost quit when the system crashed on day 3.
And Act 3 is the triumph.
Act 3 is the return with the elixir, the reward. You detail the transformative outcome. And crucially, you have to connect it back to the human pain you established in Act 1. But now that 6-hour reconciliation takes 20 minutes, accuracy is at 99%, and the accounting team leaves on time every Friday. The elixir isn't just software, it's efficiency and a better work-life balance.
That structure is incredibly powerful. It turns a boring technical upgrade into a human triumph story. So for daily use, we need to be able to craft these little mini stories.
Yes. A mini story is just a laser-focused anecdote, 30 to 60 seconds. It's designed to prove one single point right now, instead of using a corporate platitude like customer service is our highest priority.
Which means nothing.
Which is empty. You tell a mini story. I remember 3 weeks ago, we had a client with a mission-critical failure at 2 a.m. Our lead engineer, Sarah, got on a train at 3 a.m. and was on site to fix it by sunrise. That's the level of commitment we're talking about.
It's proof by narrative.
Yeah.
The key is making it specific. You named Sarah. You mentioned the 3 a.m. train and giving it that quick problem, struggle, resolution arc.
Precisely.
Okay, let's shift gears to persuasion without pressure. This is the art of getting people to move to your conclusion willingly.
And it has to start with the psychology of agreement. You must find common ground before you introduce your point of contention. This is foundational. If you lead with friction, the listener's cognitive shields go straight up. But if you lead by first outlining the 3 areas where you already share goals or values, you establish rapport. The listener sees you as a fellow traveler, not an adversary, and they become much more receptive when you finally introduce the point where you diverge.
This is where that counterintuitive technique comes in, listening to persuade. Most of us are just preparing our rebuttal while the other person is talking.
And that is the absolute hallmark of unintelligent communication. A smart speaker listens not to reply, but to diagnose the other person's framework.
What do you mean by their framework?
You're listening for their priorities, their hidden assumptions, the specific words they use over and over, and most importantly, their underlying value system. What do they truly care about?
And once you understand their framework,
you stop trying to jam your ideas into their head. You start framing your ideas so they fit within their existing belief system. If you know they value tradition, you argue that your radical new proposal is actually a return to the company's foundational principles. You're translating your message into their native intellectual language.
That's a huge shift in mindset, and we have a framework for this. The persuasion pyramid. Let's break that down.
The persuasion pyramid argues that persuasion has to be built from the ground up, like a pyramid. Most people do it backwards. They start at the very top, the call to action, and then they desperately try to find some evidence to prop it up.
So the pyramid flips that.
It completely reverses the process. You start with the base. This is the widest, most critical part. It's their needs and values. You have to start by explicitly addressing the listener's core values, their fears, their foundational needs. If I know my CEO values stability above all else, the entire base of my argument must be about maintaining stability.
Okay, so you build the foundation on their values.
Then you move to the middle. This is your evidence and logic. Here's where you bring in your data, your facts, your reasons. But crucially, All of this evidence must be explicitly aligned with the value you established at the base. If the base was stability, your evidence has to focus on risk mitigation, security, and predictable returns. You align the logic to the value.
And the final step is the top.
The apex. This is your call to action, your thesis. And because the foundation of their values and the middle of your aligned evidence are so solid, your conclusion now feels like the logical, almost inevitable next step. It doesn't feel like you're pushing an idea on them. It feels like the necessary resolution to a structure you both agreed on.
That is incredibly powerful. But what happens when logic breaks down and emotion takes over? We have to talk about handling difficult conversations smartly.
Yes, because they're inevitable. And the cornerstone technique here is what the sources call radical validation. You have to acknowledge the other person's feelings and their perspective, even if you fundamentally disagree with their interpretation of the facts.
So this doesn't mean you're agreeing with them.
Not at all. You are not saying you're right. You are saying, I see you. You're validating their right to feel the way they do. Using phrases like, I can see that this situation is incredibly frustrating for you, or that sounds like a genuinely stressful experience. It immediately disarms the emotional brain.
Because you're prioritizing the human connection over the need to be right.
Exactly. And that opens the door for rational dialogue to begin.
And once that emotional temperature has dropped, we can use the strategy of reframing the conflict.
Reframing is a very conscious, very disciplined verbal shift. You have to move the focus from people to problems, from accusations to shared goals. So instead of saying, your delay caused this budget overrun, which is an attack.
Which guarantees a fight.
Guarantees it.
Right.
You reframe it. The budget overrun is the problem we need to solve together. Let's focus on the steps we can take to protect the timeline for the next phase.
You're uniting against an external problem.
You're making the conversation collaborative instead of adversarial. You're putting both of you on the same side of the table, looking at the problem on the other side.
Can you give us a few specific smart phrases, like verbal circuit breakers we can use in the heat of the moment to reduce that tension?
Absolutely. These are invaluable. One is, that's a critical point. Let's make sure I fully understand it before I respond. It buys you time and it validates their input.
I like that. What else?
You could try, let's separate the emotion from the logistics for a moment. If we focus purely on our shared goal of X, what does the next step look like? That recenters the conversation.
Good.
Another one is simply, if I heard you correctly, your core concern is X. Is that right? That forces clarity and confirms you're actually listening. Or, my favorite, help me connect the dots between your concern about Y and the proposed solution Z. It invites them to guide your understanding, which makes them feel heard and respected.
These are great. Okay, let's move into our final section, segment 4, application and lifelong mastery. We've got the psychology, the delivery, the influence techniques. Now, how do we make this a permanent daily habit?
This is where the real work starts, and we have to begin with smart speaking in professional life, because these principles need to be customized for different contexts.
Let's start with the one we all suffer through. Structuring communication in meetings for maximum impact. Meetings are where good ideas and clarity often go to die.
In a group setting like that, conciseness is a massive competitive advantage. The smart speaker uses that PRE framework for every single contribution they make, and they signal their intent before they speak. They don't just jump in. They'll say, I have 3 quick points on this topic, or my central recommendation is X, and here's why.
And they use the pause.
They use the golden pause masterfully. Before they summarize the discussion or state the final decision, a slight pause establishes them as the person who is synthesizing all the input into a coherent direction. They add value. They don't just take up airtime.
And for anyone looking for a job, how do these skills apply to interview skills?
An interview is the ultimate high-stakes persuasion event. Clarity and confidence are everything. In this context, a smart speaker eliminates filler words completely. Any or is perceived as uncertainty, which is lethal in an interview. And they use the PRE framework inside their answers to behavioral questions. So instead of a long, rambling story, they lead with the result. They give the point first. I solved that challenge by implementing a new system that reduced customer churn by 30%. Then you tell the story. You give the interviewer the headline first.
What about delivering effective presentations? What's the key takeaway beyond just, making better slides?
The key takeaway is that a presentation is a structured performance, not a data dump. You have to frame the entire thing using the hero's journey. The audience needs a narrative arc. What was the problem? What was the struggle to find the solution? And what is the transformative result?
It's a story.
It's a story. And you use your voice like an instrument. You slow your pace for key data points, you speed up for background context, and you deploy golden pauses before the big reveals. You take them on an orchestrated journey.
And finally, in our professional lives, networking and building social capital.
Networking is all relational communication. Social capital is built by being the person who is insightful, concise, and incredibly perceptive. You use short, powerful sentences to introduce yourself. No rambling biographies.
And you listen.
You listen actively to diagnose their framework, just like we discussed. You ask targeted, insightful questions that show you're paying attention. And when you talk about yourself, you use a concise mini-story to illustrate your competence. Rather than just making a bunch of claims, you become the person who makes others feel understood. That's how you build social capital.
And the sources are really clear that these skills aren't just for the boardroom. Let's talk about smart communication in personal life.
The exact same psychological principles are what improve clarity and empathy in our relationships. So much miscommunication at home is driven by unstated assumptions and emotional triggers. Using those de-escalation techniques like validation and reframing is absolutely vital in family dynamics. When your partner or your child is upset, the smart speaker validates the feeling first. I can see you're really frustrated about this before they try to solve the problem.
This connects directly to the idea of social intelligence.
It's the foundation of it. Social intelligence is just the ability to navigate complex social situations effectively. And by mastering the ability to read nonverbals and regulate your own emotional response, you are dramatically elevating your social intelligence. You become attuned to the unspoken currents in a room.
And what about charisma? We tend to think of it as this magical, innate quality. But the sources suggest that intentional speech is what builds appeal.
Charisma is a skill set. It's not magic. And intentional speech is its engine. Charismatic speakers use emotional storytelling to connect with people. They use vocal variety to convey passion. They speak with precision, using frameworks like PRE, which makes the listener feel intelligent and clear. At its core, charisma is built on making other people feel safe and understood.
Okay, so this all brings us to the final, most important part, building a lifelong smart speaker habit. This kind of change doesn't happen overnight.
Not at all. It requires continuous, deliberate practice. The sources recommend integrating daily 5-minute drills into your routine. These are just micro-practices to build the muscle memory for clarity and control.
Okay, what does a drill actually look like? Give us the specific steps.
One of the most effective is the PRE improv drill. You set a timer for 5 minutes. You pick 3 random objects in the room, a coffee mug, a lamp, a book. For each one, you have to immediately formulate a sharp 2-sentence PRE statement about it. The goal is to force your brain to think in that structure instantly.
I love that. What's another one?
The silent check drill. Use the voice memo app on your phone. Record yourself for 60 seconds describing something complex that happened in your day. Then immediately play it back, but listen only for the filler words, the ums, the likes. The next time you listen only for weak sentence structure. You're building the self-awareness you need to catch yourself in real time.
Let's talk about vocabulary growth. Specifically, how to expand your word choice without sounding pretentious.
Yes, precision, not complexity, is the goal. The moment you use a word just to sound smart, you've lost the connection. Vocabulary growth should be about finding the single, most precise word for your meaning. So instead of saying the situation was very bad, you might choose the word precarious. It's more precise. It implies instability and risk in a way that very bad just doesn't.
And how do you integrate new words so they sound natural?
Conscious adoption. When you learn a new precise word, you have to commit to using it 3 times in real conversation the very next day. That's what moves it from your passive vocabulary to your active natural one.
And this all feeds into a larger continuous improvement strategy. What's the macro level commitment?
You have to live in a perpetual beta testing mode with your communication. The strategy has 3 pillars. 1 is deliberate practice, like the drills. 2 is actively seeking feedback, and not just, how was my presentation? Ask a trusted colleague, did my vocal pace slow down for the key points? Get specific.
And the third pillar
is reflective review. This is the post-game analysis. Immediately after a high-stakes conversation, take 5 minutes and journal. What was my PRE point? Did my golden pause actually land? What nonverbal cue did I miss? By treating every single interaction as a data point for learning, you guarantee you'll keep getting better over time.
And that brings us to the end of this incredibly detailed deep dive. We've gone all the way from the filtering mechanisms of the brain to the architecture of lifelong mastery.
And the transformation promised in this source material, it's very real. Mastering smart speaking really can profoundly influence your career, your confidence, and the quality of your relationships. When you understand the psychological tools like authority bias and framing, and you implement the structural frameworks like PRE and the persuasion pyramid, you move beyond just talking. You enter the realm of genuine high-impact influence.
So as a final thought, we want to recap those absolute essentials. Remember the power of the three-step framework, PRE, for instant clarity. Deploy the golden pause to make sure your most critical points have real gravity. And always use the framing effect to build your arguments on a base of shared values and understanding.
And we want to leave you with one final concept to think about, one that kind of transcends all the tactics we've discussed. True mastery lies in adopting the mindset of a powerful communicator. This is the ongoing, relentless commitment to understanding your audience, their fears, their values, their internal wiring, as much as you understand your own content. At the end of the day, the most influential speakers are always the most perceptive listeners.
So your homework is this. Stop obsessing over your script and start actively diagnosing the person across from you. Before you speak, ask yourself, what do they truly value? How can I frame this message to align with their existing world? Start there and watch your communication transform from something that is transactional to something that is genuinely influential.